Good afternoon, everyone. After the academic lectures by the best speakers, 27 lectures in last 2 days, now we have come to the final session of this IACTACON 2021. And this session is a panel discussion, and the topic of the discussion is cardiac anesthesia practice, past, present, and future, a global perspective. When I call it a global perspective, I'm very happy to share with you, all of you, that first time probably in any of the medical conference, the presidents of all major cardiac anesthesia society around the globe, that is out of all 6 continents, are there with us. And to have a panel discussion with them, we have none other than the most academic person, one of the most academic person of our Cardiac Anesthesia Society, IACTA, Dr. Deepak Tempe. We have got Dr. Shenton Sherman from SCA. We have got Dr. Pelisa from South Africa, Dr. Varen Peve from Australia, Eric Leinberger from Brazil, and Fabio from Italy, IACTA. They'll be introduced by Dr. Tempe in detail. But before I hand it over to Dr. Tempe, sir, may I tell you about him? He is one of the most knowledgeable and most respected cardiac anesthetist from India. He is probably the only anesthetist, cardiac anesthetist, who has got a President's Award, the BC Award, by the President of India. He retired from GB Pant Hospital as Director Hospital of the Institute, and he's been honored as a honorary fellowship by the British Society, and he has written 2 books also. He is the chairman of our Eco Library editorial board, and presently he is the Chancellor of Indian College of Cardiac Anesthesia, which is unit of our IACTA. And he's been at various levels and various committees of government and other societies, helping academically, socially, and all the things. And I'll keep on talking about him if I start, but looking at the constraints of time, I hand it over to Dr. Deepak K. Tempe, Chancellor Indian College of Cardiac Anesthesia. Hand over to you, sir, and I'm sure with all the participants, we'll have a good academic sessions and discussions. And with me, I've got my colleague, Dr. Sandeep Mutha, who's the treasurer of our society. And we have been working to conduct this workshop together. And I welcome all the panelists on behalf of Indian Society of Cardiovascular Thoracic Anesthesia, IACTA. And I'm sure this collaboration, this relationship will continue in the coming years as well. Over to Dr. Deepak Tempe.
Thank you, Dr. Rajesh, and welcome to this very important panel discussion. I have with me Dr. Fabio Buracino, who is the president of European Association of Cardiothoracic Anesthesiology. He is from Pisa, Italy. I have Dr. Stanton K. Sherman, who is the president of Society of Cardiovascular Anesthesiologists, USA. He works in the Harvard Medical School. Then I have Dr. Pelisa Mochabi, who is an academic head, Department of Anesthesia, Wills School of Clinical Medicine, Johannesburg. And she is the president of South African Society of Cardiac Anesthesia. We have Dr. Varen Peve, who is the chair of Australian Cardiac Thoracic and Perfusion Special Interest Group. And we have Eric Leinberger, who is the chairman of Cardiothoracic Vascular Committee of Brazilian Society of Anesthesia. And we have our own Dr. Praveen Kumar Nima, who is the president of IACTA. Now, welcome all of you, and thank you, especially the overseas guys who have been kind enough to join on this odd hour on a Sunday morning. And I'm very happy to conduct this virtual conference. So this is a great way. The Corona has taught us how to conduct a conference on virtual platform. It's a great way. However, I must admit that we are missing all the fun that we have during the physical conferences, and which I hope to have next year in the Madurai conference. So going on with the topic for the discussion today, as you know that Mr. Winston Churchill has said that the longer you can look back, the farther you can look forward. So one cannot forget the historical perspective of anything in our practice. So let me start off with the first question, and I would like Dr. Eric to respond to this question. Please highlight one or two major historical events in your country, and please define the turning point, if any, related to cardiac anesthesia practice in your country. Dr. Eric, please.
I thank you very much for the invitation. Very honored to participate in a meeting with so many important representatives of the globe here. I'm going to share now a presentation with a few quick slides. Everyone can see the slides, just to be sure. Everyone seeing?
Yes,
okay.
we can.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm gonna share with you here a few slides about the timeline of the cardiovascular and thoracic anesthesia timeline here in Brazilian Society of Anesthesiology. We have a committee of cardiovascular and thoracic anesthesia that emerged after years of innovation and the specialty of anesthesia growing up with the advance in surgery, beginning in the 50s, the 60s, and just to show here that we have a committee that is composed of 3 members, 3 anesthesiologists with notable knowledge in cardiovascular anesthesia. It's a 3-year term for the members, and some turn points lately. I can share here that in 2011, a group of 7 anesthesiologists started a course sponsored by the Brazilian Society of Anesthesiology in transesophageal echocardiography. It was a very important turning point because it united all these anesthesiologists from different parts of Brazil. And in 2018, it was a very important year too, because we have 2 major happenings here in the society. It was the publication of a book of transesophageal and transthoracic echocardiography, and along with that, we published it in the Brazilian Journal of Anesthesiology. It's this paper about a consensus on perioperative transesophageal echocardiography of the Brazilian Society of Anesthesiology and the Department of Cardiovascular Image of the Brazilian Society of Cardiology. So it was a very important year. And after that, now in 2021, we ask ourselves if basic training in cardiovascular anesthesia wouldn't be a time for a unified program in Brazil. So we are working on a Brazilian Society of Anesthesiology consensus about education and training in cardiovascular anesthesia, which is a work in progress, already authorized by the board of the Brazilian Society of Anesthesiology, which might be for sure be publishing during this year of 2021.
Thank you, Dr. Eric. Can we move on to Dr. Fabio, please?
Muted.
Can you unmute, please, Dr. Fabio?
Hello, good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure and an honor for me to join this panel. I thank you very much for the invitation. Well, can you see my slide? I hope so.
Yeah.
I am here representing Europe as president of IACTA, so I tried to give you, let's say, an average view on the historical events and turning points in Europe regarding our cardiac anesthesia scenario. I think that here in this slide, you see probably the three most important historical events and turning points for us in Europe. The first heart transplant in Europe was performed by Professor Cabrol in 1968, and this for sure changed the cardiac anesthesia practice, bringing the cardiac anesthetist into the world of the denervated and immunosuppressed heart. Another important historical event for the cardiac anesthesia community in Europe was the starting of the certification process in the adult transesophageal echocardiography. This was a really very important aspect following a very intense and hard work with the European Society of Cardiology. Nowadays, since more than 20 years, this certification is run in a collaborative fashion by IACTA and the AACVI. And then in 2002, the first TAVI procedure in Europe was performed by Professor Cribier in 2002. And this again changed, was really a very important turning point for us, because this brought the cardiac anesthetist outside the OR, as we all know, into the cath lab, the hybrid room, and so on. So I think that from the European perspective, these are the most important historical events and turning points for us.
Thank you, Dr. Fabio. Can we now move on to Dr. Stanton, please?
Hello, everyone, and again, thank you for the honorable invitation to participate in this probably first-time event. As was mentioned beforehand, that I can't recall certainly history having had such a worldwide representation of such of the presence of all the societies. My approach to this question, I guess, is a little bit different. Not so much in terms of what was generated in the United States per se. I'm proud to say that there have been a lot of accomplishments both in cardiac surgery, from some of the first procedures done in valve surgery, to a tremendous number of technological events. But I think in terms of what have been the greatest influences on how we care for patients from worldwide contributions, clearly the whole concept of changing the cardiac, for example, management of patients from a very high dose narcotic to what we first referred to in the early 90s as fast tracking, where we reduced significantly our narcotic burden, if you will, on patients, to what's now referred to as enhanced recovery after surgery, or ERAS or EROX, I think has been a multinational actually contribution to the overall care of patients and outcomes from a number of different expectations, not only in terms of changing analgesic regimens, but even preparing patients for expectations of how they should be cared and released from the hospital and post-operative management as well. And I think that's been, again, contributions from a multinational level. From a technological level, I'm clearly biased, but I think the role of echocardiography and ultrasound has certainly revolutionized the way we've taken care of patients as well. And some of those innovations have come from the United States, but frankly, it's really been an international collaboration where it's become a standard monitor, and one that, of course, is used almost routinely in cardiac surgery and in the structural heart disease lab. But it's clearly enhanced how we provide care for patient and what the value is that we bring to the table. So again, I would say and focus pretty much on international contributions, multinational contributions, and how they've influenced us all.
Thank you, Dr. Stanton. Most of us would agree that echocardiography has made a lot of difference in our anesthesia practice. And thank you for bringing out the global contribution towards the progress of cardiac anesthesia. Can we now ask Dr. Palesa, please, to respond?
Thank you very much for this opportunity from deep in Africa. I just wanted to allude to the history, and I just want to share a slide with you. There we go. Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can.
It's a bit slow. Again, I'm the current president of the Cardiac Anesthesia Society of Southern Africa. And just, in terms of the history of cardiac anesthesia in our country, obviously the beginning wasn't as organized as we would have liked it to be, and not as organized as we're trying to be at the moment. However, just an important thing is the history of heart transplant, which was basically, the first one was done in Africa, in South Africa by Christian Barnard in Cape Town in 1967, actually. Which is a big mark for us in Africa. However, in terms of, where we are today, I think 2010 was a very good year. This is the year where basically the leaders in cardiac anesthesia in the country, if I name a few, Justian Sonnevelde, Natim Dladla, Stephanie Fisher, and a couple of other people came together and decided that perhaps we should organize ourselves and we should form, a society. Basically, it was an interest group in the beginning. But why I'm saying 2010 was a good year was because in the same year, I just happened to have visited the US and Stan, and got a lot of inspiration and came back into, a period where everybody was saying, let us get together and do something. So, the leaders sat and they agreed on going forward and forming this association. And through this visit that I had in the US, and I'd seen what is being done, we came up with a concept of actually starting a joint perioperative congress, cardiothoracic and vascular congress in South Africa, which I founded, and I started with Stanton with his help and his faculty, which has been going on now for the past 9 years. So basically 2010 was a turning point for all of us. Some of my colleagues had come back from Europe, and echocardiography became a big part of it. And one of the things that we did in my center, at least because we didn't have an accredited echocardiography anesthesiologist, what we did then, we started having meetings on electronically with the Harvard faculty in a way to teach us how to start our own echo training. So this is a little bit about the history in our country, and we've progressed quite a lot over the years, in building our society.
Thank you, Dr. Palesa. You seem to be the leader in forming the Joint Perioperative Care Congress group, and the story of forming associations in most of the countries has been similar to what you have just narrated. A small group came together and they, gave a shape to the societies in the cardiovascular anesthesia. Dr. Warren Pavi, can we have your comments, please?
Thanks, Dr. Deepak. It's great to be here and joining you all. I'll try and keep mine brief. I think it's interesting to note, and I just found out recently myself, that the cardiac surgery using bypass in Australia began in 1957, which was only 3 or 4 years after Dr. Gibbon in the US. So I thought it was quite interesting and early on in the piece for cardiac surgery. But in terms of turning points, one thing slightly unique to Australia is that many cardiac anaesthetists are engaged in medical perfusion, unlike, I think, many other countries. And our Society of Medical Perfusionists began in the 1970s. It continues to this day. It's a relatively small society, perhaps 100 members or so, practicing medical perfusion alongside clinical perfusionists throughout the country. So I think that's something a little bit unique to Australia. I believe Argentina has a similar sort of system, but that's certainly set us apart a little bit, and be happy to discuss more about that later if you wish.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Apavi. Dr. Nima, can you please highlight us all about the Indian progress historical? You are muted. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Tempe. See, I started my journey in cardiac anesthesia in 1985. And I would say that those times were like uncertain ones. You are never sure whether the patient will come off pump or not. And today, if you look at, you are almost guaranteed that each and every patient will come off pump. So the journey of cardiac anesthesia and cardiac surgery in last 40 years has been phenomenal. And now it's, see, the certainty is the rule. Okay. Now I would like to highlight two important points in the history of cardiac anesthesia in India. One is about the development of the heart-lung machine. See, what has happened in US, in India also, Dr. Dhruv and Dr. P.K. Sen joined together with the two engineers, Mr. Bathena and Mr. Kursadji, and developed indigenous heart-lung machine. And with the help of that heart-lung machine, Dr. K.M. Dastur, he is the first one to operate a case of secondum ASD. That was on 16th of February 1961. And Dr. Janak Mehta, he was the one who gave the anesthesia to the patient. And in his name, the society is running an award for the young cardiac anesthesiologist. And that is part and parcel of the IACTA meetings from last 24 years. Okay. Now the second important thing I want to highlight is that about the development of the Chitra heart valve. Again, it was there in somewhere in 1985-86. Now you see the journey started with implanting the valves in the dogs. And that time initially what used to happen, that majority of the dogs, they did not make it. And when they looked into what is actually happening, they found that the dogs, they died of hyperkalemia. Okay. Then anesthesiologist for the dogs discussed the issue with the veterinary surgeon. And they came to understand that the dogs, they continue to lose electrolytes in their saliva. And the process of salivation and panting stops during anesthesia when the valve is being replaced. And that could be the reason why the potassium level is going up and the dogs are not coming off pump. And with that, the implantation started in sheep. And you see, within no time, every sheep after implant survived. So you see, just knowing what the physiology is, what actually is happening in the body, can really, you see, make the difference between success and failure. So I would say that, you see, the one important thing we learn from that is knowing the physiology is very, very important. So these are the two important things I would like to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nima, and all of you. I think we all had our days of struggle and difficulties, and we all overcame them with our own efforts. And that's why we are in the present scenario. So with that background and historical perspectives, let me move on to the present scenario. And I would like you to describe the current situation regarding adult as well as pediatric. I would like to club both the things together, adult as well as pediatric cardiac anesthesia for individual countries, in terms of the types of patients, the types of surgeries, and the types of anesthetic techniques or monitoring or any such things that you would like to highlight in the present scenario. For this, can we start with Dr. Fabio, please?
Okay, so here I am. So the current situation, to go to the present time of cardiac anesthesia in Europe, is basically represented by adult cardiac anesthesia performed in many institutions throughout Europe, whereas heart transplant activities and pediatric cardiac anesthesia are concentrated in a few cardiac centers. Probably this is true also outside Europe, but in my country and in Europe in general, this is the current situation. As far as I know, there are no specific teaching, training, or research programs in European countries, and this is the reason why IACTA a few years ago started having a teaching training program for young cardiac anesthetists, and I'm very happy to say that we have now several IACTA accredited centers in Europe, but also outside Europe, for example, in South America, in Brazil, and we have very, very positive feedback from our colleagues attending the programs in these centers. Another important aspect, I think, is that cardiac anesthesia in Europe is more and more outside the OR, as I already said in my previous talk. We have many activities run in hybrid rooms and cath lab. And so from the European perspective, the cardiac anesthetist is a member of the heart team, and I would say that he's a very active member of the heart team, as we are taking care of the patients during the procedures, but in general, the cardiac anesthetist is considered a physician taking care of the patient in the whole perioperative period. One more point I would like to underline is that as all this is happening everywhere, as we could hear from my colleagues a few minutes ago, a globalization of the healthcare practices is probably something we should advocate for. And the new tools for communication we have could promote this and also allow easy exchange programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fabio. Can you just please highlight about the types of adult surgical procedures that you commonly perform?
Sorry, I didn't get it. Sorry.
The types of adult cardiac surgical procedures that you perform in Europe.
Oh, I would say any, valve repair, revascularization, aortic surgery, and also the so-called transcatheter procedures, which are nowadays performed also by surgeons, not only by interventional cardiologists, depending on the different attitudes. There are countries where these transcatheter procedures are run only by cardiologists, but I know places in Europe where these procedures are also performed by cardiac surgeons. But independent of who is the operator, the cardiac anesthetist is always there.
The common man.
Yeah.
The common person.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Stanton, would you please highlight us about the present scenario in the United States?
Sure. In the United States, the general model is somewhat different than we see in Europe and in Australia. We do have academic practices and private practices. They're mostly differentiated by financial models. We don't have different patient populations per se. We have patients whose insurance is government supported, and we have private payers, but you'll see that both in academic practices and private practices. And frankly, I'm on salary. I have no control over the patients I see. So we tend to treat everybody the same. In terms of the types of cases that are done, perhaps more of the complex cases are focused in those academic practices where the idea is that we're more, perhaps more innovative, perhaps some of the more experienced surgeons may be in terms of intellectual approaches to procedures, but frankly, in academic practices, the surgeons tend to do higher volumes of surgery. So from a technical aspect, settings. Clearly, all the education occurs in academic practices, and our fellows, I'd say about half of them tend to stay in academic practices, and the other half, I think, are attracted by the higher salaries to go into private practice models. As Fabio mentioned, I think one of the current challenges has to do with out of the conventional operating room procedures in the cath lab and electrophysiology labs, and how to provide both personnel and develop new financial models that are dramatically different from what we're used to in conventional operating rooms. This has really changed the way we've thought about providing cardiac care. And I think we're not going to get through this hour today without talking about the influence of COVID and the pandemic and how that's really changed the way we think, not only in terms of treating this virus, but how we act together on a multidisciplinary level within a hospital, how we act on a multidisciplinary level within a country, and how we think on a multidisciplinary level on an international level. It's had a huge impact, both in terms of the disease itself, but on a much more general level.
Yes, indeed, we have learned what is meant by teamwork with this COVID pandemic, and not a teamwork, not within the institutions, but across the globe. We need to, join hands to fight the problem of the nature of COVID. Dr. Stanton, when you say academic practice, do you mean public hospitals?
So again, we don't have the same differentiation in terms of public versus private. That's really on an insurance level. We've got government-supported insurance and private reported insurance, but our hospitals are not divided up in between private and public. I have patients who have private insurance and patients who have government-supported, and frankly, I don't even look. They're all the same to me.
Okay. Dr. Palesa, please, your thoughts.
Thank you very much again. It's quite a hard act to follow after Stan, because in our country, I'm sure similar to middle and low income countries like the others, it's quite different. So the big problem that we have is that, particularly in South Africa, if I were to focus on South Africa alone, in a population that is just over 50 million, we've got two separate healthcare programs, so to speak. So we have the public sector and we have the private sector. However, the public sector possibly caters for about 80% of our population with very limited resources in terms of consumables and all of that, including human resources. And that's driven by salaries and remuneration in the public sector. And then we have a private sector that possibly has 80% capacity that caters for 20% of the population. So that's quite a big discrepancy if you think about it. And the other problem is that the public sector is the training facilities for human resource. We train anesthesiologists that we bleed to the public sector, which is problematic because you feel like you're rolling a continuous wheel that never ends. However, it's the discrepancies are basically remuneration related. So what we deal with is we still have a big load of rheumatic heart disease, mitral valves, aortic valves, complicated a lot by all the complications that are mentioned in the literature. We've actually are completing a study now where we find that quite a lot of our patients come in heart failure, they come in with severe pulmonary hypertension, they have arrhythmias, and they have valve areas of less than one mitral valve. So we deal with very, very sick valve cases, rheumatic heart cases. And that is because of the burden of trying to get through all these cases in the public sector and the long waiting time periods because you can't get to everybody at the same time. And usually when there's periods where there's a crisis, we get to the bottom of the list where we only deal with emergencies, and you find that then other people are, their disease is progressing because all you can do is do emergencies. And a lot of these patients are, valve cases that are rheumatic are young patients. A lot of them come in pregnant, they're emergencies. So we do open hearts. We help with valvotomies in the cath lab. However, in the same breath, we're trying to catch up with technology. So we've started TAVI programs, and, we do minimally invasive surgery. So it's a mix, it's probably not a bad thing, but it's quite a mix, and it's difficult to push one without taking the other into consideration. The other thing that we lack a lot in the public sector is a human resource in terms of pediatric cardiac surgeons. We do pediatric cardiac surgery, but we have in the whole country, 2 main hospitals that are purely pediatric. And the other burden is that we don't only cater for South Africans, but we cater for Africans. I'm sure everybody has seen recently where one of the American actors got injured, took 55 hours to get to South Africa from Kenya for just a broken leg. So you can imagine we cater for cardiac surgery for everybody in the SADC region, and some of them like in Middle Africa. So it's a big burden. There's lack of resources in our other countries where there's no skill. So it's quite a complex problem.
Thank you, Dr. Palesa. We can appreciate the problems that you face, as we also tend to face problems somewhat similar to yours. And we do appreciate for highlighting these issues on this forum. Dr. Pavi, please, can you highlight about your country?
Yes, hi again, Dr. Deepak. Look, I think issues specific to Australasia, that is Australia and New Zealand, I think are these. So we too have a mix of public and private practice, almost 50-50 mix in terms of caseload. Perhaps somewhat different to other countries, most of our anaesthetists are involved in cardiac as well as thoracic anesthesia, and the surgeons too are generally cardiac and thoracic surgeons, and there hasn't really been a separation as yet of thoracic surgery from cardiac surgery. In terms of pediatrics, our pediatric cardiac anaesthetists generally don't do adult cardiac anesthesia. I'm an adult anaesthetist, and I'm sort of ashamed to say I've never done a pediatric cardiac case. And there is I think, an opportunity there for us to build better bridges and a better union with our pediatric colleagues, and something that we're lacking here. In terms of procedures, we too actually have a large rheumatic population. The indigenous Aboriginal Australians, mainly in the north, suffer badly from rheumatic heart disease. They present late as well, and most of the tertiary centres are a good distance away from the indigenous communities. So we do see some quite bad pathology, late presenting pathology to our tertiary centres in the indigenous peoples. Transesophageal echo is fairly universal in Australia, and we recently did a survey of practice across our country and invited other countries to participate. And we found, interestingly, that in the UK, for example, the use of TEE or TOE, as you might call it, is dropping because of the risks of TEE. And I'd be interested in the other members' thoughts from this panel on that, whether they see any risks and whether they see TEE use dropping. I spoke already about there being medical perfusion. About 1/3 of our cardiac anaesthetists would consider themselves as medical perfusionists. Our ICUs in Australia are generally closed units. So I did work for some time in the UK, and cardiac anaesthesia was also servicing the cardiac ICUs. That's not the case in Australia. Intensive care is closed and run by intensivists per se. And finally, we're also involved in hybrid and TAVI theatres. We've recently started a percutaneous mitral valve program here in Perth as part of a sort of early in-man study. It's very exciting work. We do participate in multidisciplinary teams for percutaneous valve work. But interestingly, there are some places in Australia that are moving away from anaesthetic support for these procedures. And I wonder, Stan, if you've seen that in the US or any other countries have seen the same sort of thing, where cardiologists are performing these procedures without anaesthetic support on site or present at the time. In terms of training, we too lack a sort of unified training approach to cardiac anaesthesia. We have numerous fellowships around the country, but our college doesn't mandate a certain skill set for cardiac anesthesia per se. They do for echo and TEE and also for perfusion, but not for cardiac anesthesia. And we are also, as you may have noticed, a special interest group. So we're part of the college and under their banner. And we have 700 members, 300 or so active members. We're slowly growing, and we're thinking actively about when we should take the step to becoming a society or association in our own right. We're a relatively small country, 25 million people, and so it's become a little bit difficult for us to have the volume to separate off as a society. In terms of research, there's little nationwide research. The ANSCA, which is our College of Anesthetists, has a clinical trials group, and there's some interesting cardiac work happening there, especially in iron and in cardiopulmonary exercise testing before surgery, which is good. And our own group here in Perth are doing some preclinical work. We're looking at organ preservation for transplant, mainly hearts in DCD populations. So we think that's exciting, and we think there's been really a lack of preclinical work happening in cardiac anesthesia in Australia, and so we're hoping to try and push that along a little bit. I think they're the main issues at present for us in Australasia.
Thank you, Dr. Pavi. You have covered most of the issues that I was hoping to address in subsequent questions, but thank you for summarizing all the issues related to clinical practice, education, and training programs in your country. Dr. Eric and Dr. Nima are there. Can we ask Dr. Eric to please highlight us about what is going on in Brazil?
It's been exciting years. This last 10 years here in Brazil. Recently, we merged the Brazilian Society of Anesthesiology Committee in Cardiovascular and Thoracic Anesthesia with the echocardiography group, that one that I showed that teaches echocardiography in a course chancelled by the Brazilian Society of Anesthesiology. We have been publishing, we have been giving lessons, lectures around the country. In the echocardiography course, we have taught more than 1,000 anesthesiologists here in Brazil. It's a very critic mass of anesthesiologists that are spreading the technique. Here in Brazil, we have 3 years of training in anesthesia. We don't have a unified program in cardiac anesthesia. And we are working on it, as I showed before in that slide. It's going to be published a uniformized program for this year. But we have several training programs in Brazil, some older, some newer ones, chancelled by the IACTA, for example, that Dr. Guarracino just said, in São Paulo, that is the first non-European IACTA fellowship program, which I have the pleasure to be a faculty in Dante Pazanese in São Paulo. There's Dr. Carlos Galhardo working in Rio de Janeiro in the Institute of Cardiology, in this postgraduate program in cardiac anesthesia, University of São Paulo. I can say several groups, several departments that are working with fellows here in Brazil. Lately, we have been working in representatives in terms of international networking. We have members in the Society of Cardiovascular Anesthesiologists, in the cerebral protection working group, in the international committee group. We have in IACTA too. In terms of cardiac anesthesia and cardiac surgeries, I pretty much say that Dr. Paleza traced that picture that is pretty similar to Brazil here. There are sick patients who gets into the surgery with advanced heart failure, advanced stages of valvular disease, of rheumatic disease. People with these problems are common because they wait too much in line to schedule for a surgery. It's a very important issue here. The public system don't pay for some treatments like circulatory support, like ECMO, like LVADs. It's very difficult, and I can say the same for the interventional cath lab. So it turns to be sectorized private practice, which is not a huge number of patients that can get to this treatment here. So these are basically things that we have to get through it. I think pediatric anesthesia, pediatric surgeries are confined in great volumes of surgeries in the major cities and capitals here in Brazil, where we have these programs to teach pediatric anesthesia and so. And I think it's in terms of Brazil, what I can say about the present, I think it's quite enough summary about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Eric. Dr. Nima, please. Dr. Nima is offline, I think. Is he there?
He had some internet problems. He will be there.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll just move on to last two quick rounds. We'll give Nima the opportunity when he joins us again, if he does. Just very quick answers from all of you on two issues. Number one, is the cardiac anesthesiologist moving out of the cardiac operating rooms into the hybrid areas or the catheterization laboratories more often than not? And is he, what do you think about the globalization of the healthcare in terms of the present communication, availability of communication techniques? Do you think that we can have more interactions between each other, and also can we have some case discussions, difficult case discussions, before we actually embark upon managing those patients? So can we start with Dr. Stanton, please? Can you just very quick response on these two issues?
Sure. With regards to cardiac anesthesia care outside of the conventional operating rooms, it's revolutionized the way we've thought about practice and the way we've thought about caring for patients. We probably commit as many resources now to the cath lab and electrophysiology labs as we do to the operating room. And it's changed, again, not only financial models, but education, technology, communication, and things that we haven't been confronted with before. But it's here to stay, and it's going to evolve even farther. With regards to globalization of healthcare, it's not only important, it's critical. We cannot avoid, and we shouldn't, the contributions that we all can make to taking care of patients and the synergism that will enable us to take care of patients better. So I think it's critical, actually, that we look seriously at how to use this opportunity through these virtual platforms to learn from each other.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Nima seems to have joined us. Can you hear me, Dr. Nima?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Can you just go on to describe the present scenario in the Indian context, please?
I would like to highlight two important points. One is about the prevalence of rheumatic heart disease in India, and the second is about the presence of pediatric cardiac surgery in India. Now, if you look at the present data, it speaks about that we have a burden of around 250,000 valves, mitral valves every year. About 250,000 mitral valves every year, and about 200,000 pediatric congenital heart disease patients every year. And if you look at the current facility available in the country, we can cater to something around maximum 200 to 250,000 open hearts in a year, combined all the centers available in the country. So what you see that recently in one of the article, Dr. Tempe has talked about the revival of closed mitral commissurotomy. The reason being that the burden of rheumatic heart disease in India is so big that if we look for only open mitral commissurotomy or balloon mitral valvotomy, or we wait for mitral valve replacements, many patients may not reach to the facility, and therefore, like what Tempe has mentioned, I also believe in the fact that maybe the closed mitral commissurotomy is a viable option for those patients. I don't know, the same may be true for other developing countries, because everywhere the resources and the centers are yet limited. That is one thing. Then secondly, about the pediatric misfits, we have got a burden of nearly 200,000 cases every year. And the facility available as of now, we do around 20,000 pits every year. There's still 180,000 patients every year. They keep piling up. The resources, the centers, they are limited. We need to really address these issues, have more number of centers, have more number of cardiac surgeons, more number of cardiac anesthesiologists. Then only it would be possible to tackle such a the big problem what we are facing as of now.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nimal. Now, I really need a very quick response on those two issues that are highlighted about the hybrid operating rooms, cath lab, and the use of the global, the communication network that we have for the benefit of the globalization of the healthcare. Dr. Pavi, please, can you highlight about very quick response on these two issues?
Sure, Dr. Deepak. My thoughts on these are that I mentioned already that we're doing a lot of extra work outside the OR in cath lab and in hybrid theatres, but already the cardiologists are moving fast, and our need in certain places is disappearing there. And I wonder how we can maintain our relevance in these areas. I wonder if perhaps we need to change or improve our skill sets to remain relevant in cath lab or hybrid theatres. And when I say that, I'm talking about a couple of things. So when we participate in multidisciplinary team meetings for pre-op or peri-op planning, we can bring the intraoperative perspective or even the sort of short perioperative perspective. But really, as anesthetists, I think we need to perhaps improve our understanding of health economics, maybe of frailty assessments, and with better understandings in these areas, perhaps we can contribute more meaningfully to these discussions and improve our relevance. The other thing where I wonder we can look to move towards is in perhaps in wire skills. I know our surgeons, for example, are following their cardiology colleagues acquiring and improving their wire skills. Support in cath labs like ECMO and Impeller are growing all the time. And we as anesthetists, I think, seem to be a little bit left out in that area. And I wonder if there's opportunity there for us to acquire skills in this regard as organ care specialists and perhaps pursue that to, again, remain relevant in cath labs and hybrid theatres. With regard to globalization, certainly, COVID has shown us that it's clearly important. This meeting itself is a product of that. In terms of Australia, as a smaller country, I mentioned that we have difficulty homogenizing and creating a training program for cardiac anesthesia. And I was really excited to hear about IACTA's efforts to extend into South America. And I wonder whether, joining up with IACTA or the SCA in terms of training programs for smaller countries like ours could be an opportunity to unify and improve training for our cardiac anesthetists.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Fabio. We have 6 minutes, but I would like you to sum up very quickly in a minute or so, because I want to have one more question about the future.
Yes, sure. I will be very, very, very quick. Regarding the hybrid procedures outside the standard OR, I think that there are two major points to underline on which we as societies and associations should work very hard in future. I refer to the new communication we need to set, because in those hybrid rooms, we work with people who are not used to work with the anesthetist. So the communication is easy with the surgeons, is not that easy with other colleagues like interventional cardiologists, echocardiographers, and so on. So we need to have a common language also in the hybrid room, exactly as we did since a very long time in the standard OR with our friends, the surgeons. The other point I would like to underline regards the globalization of the practices. I think this is a very good point and a very good idea. I would say that it is we should advocate for that. And in my mind, there is also one more reason to do that. The reason is that we should do any effort to convey the information and the practices in a scientific way in order to avoid what the new tools are pushing, the so-called social media medicine, which can be, let's say, dangerous. So I really think that we should use these new tools in a way that we can gather all our community together to find the best practices across the globe for our patients.
Thank you, Dr. Fabio. Dr. Palisa, could you please give your opinion, thoughts on this subject? Very quickly.
Thank you very much. So again, in our society, we have limited numbers. So basically we cover peds, we do peds thoracics, we do adult cardiac surgery as well, and the same pool often gets involved in cath lab. So it's quite difficult to separate because you get the same skill set and we're trained by the same people. But in terms of where we could go, I think we, in our department at least, we get this whole virtual thing. I mean, as I say, way back in the beginning in 2011, 2012, we were doing meetings with Stan's department on Skype. That's before the advent of Zoom and Microsoft and whatnot. So I'm quite keen and curious to know if Stan has any new ways or methods of imparting the knowledge and skill that they have with different things that are much more advanced than Zoom and Microsoft Teams, because one of the reasons why we couldn't continue with Skype is because of connectivity issues. But that was quite revolutionizing for us, excuse me, because they moved us from literally almost nothing and confidence in doing what we were doing. And again, in terms of collaborations, I want to just acknowledge as well the Department of Cardiac Anesthesiology at Children's Hospital in Boston, Jim's department, Jim Dinado, who, when we were learning how to deal with complex pediatric cases, the time zones between us and them worked quite favorably for us, because you could ask for advice today, and when you get the answer in the evening, tomorrow morning, you know exactly what to do with your case. So we started this whole collaborative thing, intercontinental, way back. The question is, where do we take it from here? And again, in our society, we don't have a formalized program of training in terms of a fellowship. However, our department am I lost? Can you hear me?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, however, our department at VETS and UCT, we've been involved in training our African colleagues in cardiac anesthesia. So the question is, how do we formalize this, and how do we also, get support again from the SCA or IACTA, to make this a formal program that they can support us in. And also, I'm quite keen on global research, particularly for developing countries as Brazil, India. How can we collaborate to look at research, look at outcomes in these cases that we see, to inform some of the guidelines that come out, with the AHA-ACC guide, because some of the studies are quite old. And if you look at historically in our country, I acknowledge a lot of research done by Professor Mayosi, who's passed on, and Professor Sliwa. But if you look at those studies, quite a lot of them are epidemiological, and there isn't enough work done for perioperative outcomes in these cases and risk factors of outcome. So I'm putting it out there for colleagues, collaborative work, let's do research, let's write our own stories. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You raised a very pertinent point that we need to formalize this, and what could be the method of formalizing this. I think we'll need another Zoom meeting to think about it and talk about it and take it forward. Dr. Eric, we are left with only 40 seconds. So I would request you to quickly as you can, summarize this particular aspect, followed by Dr. Nima also has his turn. He's waiting also.
Okay, I follow this thought that we can get together with this increasing technology. Some of them are accelerated by the pandemics. We are doing great meetings with other countries to formulate guidelines, consensus, which help to standardize and help us to deliver appropriate care in the developing countries. So I think the globalization is of a huge importance for us to get the right treatment and to convince our governments who support financially our health system to deliver the best care for our patients and diminish the mortality and augment the outcomes.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nima. You have 30 seconds to respond to this particular aspect. Sorry for the time constraint.
Yes, sure. What I think that there is a need to develop a unified data acquisition system. So that the way we manage the patients, whether it's in India or abroad, anywhere, whether it is Europe or America, we have a common unified data recording system. And then only, yes, it would be possible to take the research forward and come out with the guidelines that really do good for our patients. That is, I think, something that we all have to look into that.
Dr. Rajesh, allow me to take a vote on now. Just last one vote on a particular question. It will not take more than a minute. Do you think that in 20 years down the line, the open heart surgery will become obsolete and we will be doing work outside the operating rooms, maybe in the hybrid rooms or cath lab or elsewhere, only in the intensive care units? You have three options: yes, no, or probably. Dr. Stanton?
Probably.
Probably. Pavi, please.
I think no. I'd like to think that open heart surgery will continue, at least for, in a small way.
Dr. Fabio?
I would follow Stan, probably.
Dr. Eric?
The same.
Dr. Palesa? We have a lot of huge problem of rheumatic heart disease. We can't, stop the theaters.
To some extent, possibly for other surgical issues, but I think, again, mitral valves, rheumatic, aortic valves, they're so thickened, there's not a lot you can do but take them out. So there will still be a need for open heart surgery, I think.
Dr. Nima?
It will go on for next at least 30-40 years.
Okay.
I don't see that open heart will stop.
Okay. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining this panel. And I would like to close this with thanks to all of you on my own behalf, as well as on behalf of the IACTA and each and every member of the IACTA. Thanks you profusely for being here this afternoon and being a part of this virtual program. Dr. Rajesh, you can continue.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Sherman, Eric, Fabio, Pave, Pelisa, Dr. Niyam, and of course, Dr. Tempe. And the consensus coming was probably, but one thing I'm very sure that we should keep on meeting regularly. We should be very sure about it, and there's no need of any vote on that. And we are sure the exchange of knowledge will increase the knowledge. In Urdu, it is said, "Ilm ko jitna baantoge utna badega," which means more you spread the knowledge, more you gain the knowledge. So the exchange program like this will definitely increase the knowledge, and the aim of all of us is that ultimately the patient should be benefited. So with the Western people sharing their knowledge, the Indian people sharing our data, because the number, we have got the numbers in the Asian countries or Indian, African, and the research is more by the Western. So combinedly, we can benefit the patient. So on the end of it, I request, I thank all the panelists, and it was great having you here. The odd times, it may be somewhere around 3:30 in the morning in US, and when Dr. Sharman is about to wake up, Dr. Pevi is about to sleep now. So the sun has always been on, and we presume that you enjoyed the session with us, and we'll be communicating on email. Thank you all, and goodbye from us. Bye-bye. And President IACTA, to continue in the other session, you can log out here and quickly join the GBM. Everybody is waiting in the GBM for you. As we are closing this Medinet platform, I would like to tell all the participants of this IACTACON 2021. We had a great time. We had more than 4,500 people participating in and watching this live and participating in discussions. Probably the number might have gone beyond 5,000 probably this moment as I speak. And I'm very thankful to my colleague Sandeep, who was all the time just helping me out. Our two office clerks, Satinder and Manoj, the Medinet people, the industry, namely GE Healthcare, Philips India Limited. Apart from that, we had B. Braun, Abbott, Edwards, and Sanofi Aventis. All these companies, despite their odds of finances and the numerical numbers in their budget sheet, still they have come forward to support our this online workshop. And again, all executive members of IACTA, all ICCA board members who are the host, all our seniors, colleagues, and all my friends, thank you. And we'll definitely see you all again in 2022 in Madurai. All these emails will be given to our friend Dr. S. Kumar from Madurai, and he'll be communicating, inviting all of you to join 2022 annual conference. Meanwhile, we have got 3 workshops which are endorsed by IACTA: the TE workshop in Bangalore, in Delhi, and 3D TE workshop in Ahmedabad. Be part of those workshops also, and let's help each other in exchange of knowledge. Thank you, and all bye-bye to you all.
Thank you. Bye. All of you. See you.
Thank you. Bye.